in hopes, oh, okay, good, good thought. In hopes that we're able to rest from the activity of the false self in our daily lives, no matter how busy we are. So, my hope for today is that some of my thoughts encourage your reflection on what Advent and interior silence might mean to you. And so I wanted to start with this quote from Open Mind, Open Heart, which I think points us toward an experience of interior silence in centering prayer. Father Thomas says, in this resting and stillness, the mind and heart are not actively seeking God, but are beginning to experience, to taste what they have been seeking. And this places them in a state of tranquility and profound interior peace. This state is not the suspension of all action, but the mingling of a few simple acts to sustain one's attention to God with the loving experience of God's presence. So when we sit in silent prayer, we may reach a state where rather than seeking God, we start to experience the presence of God, what we refer to as resting in God, and what we might also call interior silence or a contemplative state. And so notice that he calls this a state, which is a way of being. Okay. And as I have pondered what interior silence means to me and how I experience the presence within, I've started to think of it more as a state. And I think it's from that state that we bring resting into the activity of daily life. So when he refers to the mingling of a few simple acts, in centering prayer, a simple act is introducing the sacred word as a symbol of our consent, or it's minimizing distractions from our environment by closing our eyes. In daily life, simple acts might be the welcome of the welcoming prayer, or the repetition of an active prayer phrase while we're walking or driving. Or it might be the lighting of a candle on our Advent wreath. So I'm going to refer to the few simple acts to sustain our attention to God throughout this presentation. So I just wanted to point you to that you will be hearing me say simple acts, and this is what I'm kind of bringing you back to. Okay, so with the Advent theme in mind, I want to look at a few simple acts that might help us sustain our attention to God's presence. So while our theme today is interior silence, I wanted to bring our attention to the four themes of Advent, which I think fit in very nicely today. So the themes of Advent follow that the first week of Advent is hope, the second week peace, the third joy, and the fourth love. And a few times in the past when I've was doing more teaching for contemplative outreach in Denver, I would offer classes during Advent and Lent to help people make the season more intentional. So these are seasons that I think of as opportunities for grace if we're intentional and we don't just let the time pass, or if we get too busy. So, which is another thing I think that's important to reflect on here. So, of course, these themes are about the coming of Christ, but there are also opportunities to incorporate these values into our daily life. And I like the way these themes are stated. These come from a website that's called Patheos, that's devoted to interreligious dialogue. And the thing that I like about the way they're presented is um, that they're ways of reflecting on the values that are action oriented, and they give us a few simple acts we can take to sustain our attention on God's presence. Okay, so again, those simple acts to keep our attention on God's presence. So we don't just hope, but we embrace hope with active anticipation. We find inner peace with yearning, reconciliation, and pursuing harmony. We celebrate joy with gratitude. We cultivate love by embodying God's love. So this is not passive at all. It very much requires us to participate. In the first centering prayer guideline that we reviewed earlier today, we say that the sacred word is a symbol of our intention to consent. So think of intention as a desire of the will, and consent is the action that manifests that desire. So, for example, we don't just wish for or desire hope, that's our intention, but we embrace it, which is the simple act that we take, which is consent. Okay, so I think if we can consent to these values and incorporate them into our daily lives during Advent, that we can carry the spirit of Advent throughout the year. And I was noticing in the Lectio this morning um, that peace, joy, and love were all included in that reading, and I think that we could infer hope as well. So I want to dig a little deeper into resting in God. It was all the way back to the 6th century that Gregory the Great described um, contemplation as the knowledge of God impregnated with love. And I think largely what he meant is the personal experience of divine love. And he's also the one who gave us the phrase resting in God. And so we'll explore what we mean by rest, and especially resting in God, and the importance of rest and being grounded if we intend to live the contemplative dimension of the gospel in our daily life. So being grounded, being centered. So if I ask you what rest means to you, what would you say? So, and you're not gonna answer my questions, but just think about this. If I suggested that you need to rest, what are you thinking of? Maybe taking a nap, sleep, vacation, getting away from what you think is making you tired. But think about, is your natural attitude or behavior one of rest, or is it one of restlessness? So how do you approach free time? For example, if you have a free Saturday coming up, you might be thinking, free day, rest. But this is how it might go. This is certainly probably how it would go for me. Oh, good, I don't have to set an alarm. Should I sleep in late? Should I read the paper? Should I take the dog to the park? Should I go shopping while football's on or go to a movie? Well, so much for rest, right? So, and I would also say for me, even when I'm sitting still, often I'm on the go. I'm caught up in the false self program, always weighing and judging what I'm doing or should be doing. So this can be, I think, a significant awareness for today and over the next couple of weeks of Advent. Are you resting or are you restless? And how can your contemplative practices assist you in experiencing true rest, which is resting in God? Can you recognize the activity of the false self and rest from that activity? And can you be in tune with how you are in daily life and approach your experiences in daily life from a place of interior silence? So we're not only speaking of resting our bodies, we want to explore and experience true rest today. Resting in God is not merely physical rest or spiritual rest, but as Father Thomas says, it's the harmony of body, mind, and spirit that is able to rest in God in the ordinary activities of our day. So reflecting on this quote makes me wonder how much of the time my body, mind, and spirit are in harmony. How much of the time am I truly resting in God? And you may wonder that about yourself. So the discipline of our contemplative practices, whether it's centering prayer, Lectio Divina, or any other simple acts, they help us reduce the obstacles to resting in God. And so we're going to spend a little more time talking about practices and their effect in daily life this afternoon. But we know the effect of the relationship centering prayer invites us to just be with God. So there's nothing for us to do, nothing needs to be fixed or changed. Everything is perfect as it is. So this resting that begins in centering prayer begins to insinuate itself in our daily lives. So we get up from the prayer knowing that resting went on, whether we were aware of it or not. So it's in this deep rest that the Spirit works and where we experience the activities of the false self. Maybe strong emotions, restlessness, aversions and attachments, and those things that reinforce our need for the energy centers, the control, the esteem, the security, wanting to change everything and everyone else. And all of this is part of what we call the unloading of the unconscious. And while this may be uncomfortable, we should recognize it as God's action. And in centering prayer, we're not only consenting to God's presence, but also God's action. It's part of the healing process, which removes those obstacles to true rest that we're talking about. And our practices help us with this, but it's not really about doing the practice so much as turning to God in the moment. So the more we turn to God, the more we rest, and the more integrated rest becomes in all facets of our lives. And so this is what contemplative life is about, I think. Father Thomas has spoken of the profound meaning of contemplative life. And he said, it is Christ in you leading your life and in complete solidarity with your life, just as it is. So this is the mystery of the incarnation, to share your life with you, to live your life for you and with you and in you. Gradually, I become less and less involved in the drama of my life and move away from over identifying with the false self. So, this is the hope that we're embracing, the peace that we yearn for, the joy we celebrate, and the love that we are cultivating during this time of Advent. So, a few more words about interior silence here. Both of these quotes are from Open Mind, Open Heart. The first one, the root of prayer is interior silence. And that leads me to think of it as something deep within, maybe even hidden, just as the roots of a tree are hidden beneath the earth. Okay. And in the second quote, as this prayer becomes habitual, a mysterious, undifferentiated, and peaceful presence seems to be established inside of you. And again, the reference is to something within. So he doesn't seem to be saying it's something that we can achieve or somehow cause to happen, but it's more something we receive or awaken to when the prayer becomes habitual. Sometimes we say that centering prayer and Lectio Divina are practices that lead to contemplative prayer, that they're doorways into contemplation, so to speak. And it's hard to put the difference between a contemplative practice and contemplative prayer into words, but I think this second quote helps us to see the distinction. A habitual practice, like a daily practice of centering prayer, is a doorway into the mysterious presence. And you know, our whole posture in centering prayer, in the centering prayer guidelines, is to quiet down inside, minimize distractions, not getting caught up in thoughts, giving our being the opportunity to experience the presence of God. And that's, I think, how our practice prepares us for interior silence. And, you know, as you've heard, and as we often say, centering prayer is a method, okay? In other words, it's something that we do. We are opening our minds and heart to God, beyond thoughts, words, and emotions. But contemplative prayer is something God does. And methods like centering prayer and Lectio Divina open the door for God to join us in the silence of our hearts. So when we open our minds and hearts to God, beyond thoughts, words, and emotions, what is it exactly that we are opening or opening to? So we're going to pause here while we're talking about the silence of our hearts. And I'm going to lead you in a guided meditation that I think helps us to get in touch with the core of our being, of the silence of our heart. So this is a meditation that I adapted from Adyashanti's work, and he called it abiding in the I am. I like to think of it as abiding or resting in the I am. So I'm going to explain a bit about the practice before we do it, but I want to invite you to start quieting down and listening, as if you haven't already been doing that. And you can close your eyes while you listen or gaze at the image on the screen. So the key to this meditation is to not think about it or try to understand it or to analyze it. So for just a few moments, if you could suspend your intellectual faculties and sense your way into this experience. So the idea here is to sense the truth of your being, not to think about it, to actually experience it. So many times throughout our day, we say these two words, I am, and then we attach something to it. So you can think about all the things that you attach to it, things that we think identify who we are, such as our name, I am Julie, a feeling, I am angry, something that we're doing, I am making dinner, what kind of work we do, I am a nurse, some judgment we make of ourselves, I am so lazy, or some sense experience, I am hungry. So, this is the way we've learned to identify ourselves. And when we talk about resting in the I am, this is who we are before the thoughts we have about ourselves create our personal identity, which in turn create emotional sensations that start a cycle that's not real. So, I think over time, through the practice of centering prayer, most of us get to this place of resting in the I am, or resting in our true self. But today we're going to put more attention on the experience of resting in the I am. So we'll begin by moving our attention into the body. If you're comfortable and you haven't already, close your eyes. Settle into your body. Notice if you're comfortable, and if you're not, make any adjustments that you need to. And now bring your attention to your breath. Just noticing that you are breathing in and breathing out. Not trying to change your breathing, just noticing. As you start to quiet down inside, gently say to yourself the words, I am. I am. As you softly invoke the words, I am, notice where they land in your body. You may be tempted by your thoughts to attach a description following I am, but just let that thought go and return to I am. Notice how quiet, how silent the experience is of I am. No self-judgment, no self-image, no opinion, no shaming, no emotional reaction, no thing. Simply, I am. A judgment or image or memory may arise, but now you can notice that it is simply something created by a thought in your mind. It's not who you are. Notice that you exist with or without those thoughts. Before you create the thoughts, in the midst of them, after they pass through your consciousness. Notice that when your mind is quiet, even if it's just for a few seconds, you still are. Not as a thought about who you are, you just are. Now, as we remain in silence for a few minutes, continue to rest in the I am, noticing if thoughts arise, using the breath if you need to bring your attention back to the present moment, invoking the words I am, resting in the I am. And I'll ring a gong at the end of the silence in a couple of minutes. I want to invite you now to remain in this deep place of silence and rest as you listen to some quotes from some contemplative teachers about the experience that you just had. So here, Martin Laird, who is an Augustinian priest who teaches the contemplative tradition at Villanova, he says, before you can know in your own experience what the psalmist meant when he said, "Be still and know that I am God," you must first learn to be still and know who you are. The rest will follow. You already are silent. I understand how there is a lot of noise and chaos swirling around. That's true of us all. But you are silence. You are the silence that is aware of the chaos. You are the silence that sees the chaos. Again, I tell you, you don't know who you are. So he says that you don't know who you are, but let's listen to what Thomas Merton says, which I think starts to give us an idea of who we are. So Merton challenges us to penetrate our silence and advance without fear into the solitude of our heart. He says, if you dare to penetrate your own silence and dare to advance without fear into the solitude of your own heart, then you will truly receive the light and capacity to understand what is beyond words and beyond explanation because it is too close to be explained. It is the intimate union in the depths of your own heart, of God's Spirit, and your own secret inmost self, so that you and God are in truth one spirit. So he's telling us that if we dare, we will be awakened to what Thomas Keating calls the transforming union. And we'll touch on that a little more this afternoon too, the transforming union. And our movement towards that. So here, John Main, who's the founder, excuse me, of the World Community for Christian Meditation, he says, the silence is there within us. What we have to do is to enter into it, to become silence, to become the silence. The purpose of meditation and the challenge of meditation is to allow ourselves to become silent enough to allow this interior silence to emerge. So, what he is saying is that the silence is already within us. And the purpose of our practice is to let go enough to allow interior silence or that mysterious, peaceful presence to emerge. And when he uses the word emerge, that says to me something that is already there is emerging. Okay. Robert Sardello is a Jungian psychologist who practices what he calls spiritual psychology and says this about quiet and silence. We can become quiet, and by doing so, the door to silence opens. So I like the way he distinguishes the simple act we can make and what we're likely to experience from that simple act. In other words, we become quiet, but we aren't opening the door to silence. The door opens. So I think here silence refers to that, again, mysterious, undifferentiated, and peaceful presence that Father Thomas talked about. And Deepak Chopra, who most of you probably know is a physician and meditation teacher, he uses the words a little differently, but is saying something similar. Meditation is not a way of making your mind quiet. It's a way of entering into the quiet that is already there. So the quiet that is already there. So it's not that we are creating something new through meditation. We're accessing, and we might even say uncovering something that we already are. And this afternoon, I'll show you a few models that show the process we go through to reach deep within to that place where the quiet already is, into the silence. And finally, this is an excerpt from one of Father Thomas's poems that I think so beautifully speaks to the experience of living a contemplative life in the flow of creation by letting go and just being. He says, our true nature is stillness, the source from which we come. It manifests itself within us as a rising tide of silence, a flowing stream of peacefulness, a limitless ocean of calm, or just sheer stillness. The deep listening of pure contemplation is the path to stillness. All words disappear into it, and all creation awakens to the delight of just being. So we're going to pause here before our next break, which I think we have about 20 minutes maybe, and open up the floor for anyone who would like to offer a reflection from what you've heard or experienced today. And we can, I don't know, how big of a group are we? We're 35. You guys did such a good job during Lexio of just unmuting yourself and speaking when you were ready without talking over each other. So I think we'll try doing that since I can't see everybody on the same screen to see who's raising their hand. So if there's something that you heard this morning in prayer, in Lexio, or in the presentation that spoke to you, or any comment or insight, anything that you would like to share, and remembering how many of us there are, so try to keep it brief.
Julie, Tina asked a question in the chat, so absolutely, Tina, you have the floor. That's one thing to do, put it in the chat.
Okay, Tina, where are you?
I am, my
There you
video is hidden today, but I am here somewhere. Thank you so much.
Hi, Tina.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. As I was listening, a question arose. As I sit in centering prayer, and I'm fairly new to this, just a few months in,
Okay.
there's a lot of internal noise, a lot of internal clamoring.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering, is that my false self? I just being noisy. And do I need to continue to practice and just be still with the Lord until my false self is settled, or he meets my false self, or some transaction, or not transaction, but transformation might occur?
Well, I don't know that I would say it's necessarily your false self. I
Mhm.
think it's so normal for us when we first start to sit in silence. I think Katie even said it in introducing centering prayer, that we are never going to stop um, our our minds from thinking, right? And so what we're really doing in centering prayer is kind of there ultimately will be like a movement below that ordinary stream of consciousness where the thoughts are coming and going. And I think most people, a lot of people anyway, experience a lot of noisiness at first. And, I can even remember when Thomas Keating would give talks about this, and people would say things like, I have so much going on that I'm returning to my sacred word 1,000 times during the 20-minute sit. And he would say, "Oh, how wonderful that you're returning to God 1,000 times." So we don't worry about that, okay?
Mhm.
It's something that's normal. It could, some of what could be happening is when, and actually we'll talk about this a little bit more this afternoon, and I'll try to remember your question, Tina, and point to it a little bit more. That sometimes what starts to happen is there's like a softening up of our defenses, and so some of what happens is things are coming up that are being healed. And so if you can just kind of hold on to that, and we'll talk about it more this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Julie. This is Jamie from Columbus.
Hi,
I just
Jane.
want to thank you for this amazing presentation and your words are so healing. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about this idea of resting from the activity of the false self. I don't think I've ever heard that before. And it would be nice to get a little bit more explanation of that.
Okay, great. I'm laughing, Jamie, at myself because the contemplative living program that which really came from the 9-month course a long time ago. But I was teaching that, I was actually teaching in that program for I don't know how many years, probably 5 or 6 years, before I ever heard that phrase, resting from the activity of the false self. So, think about maybe some of the things that that maybe you can think of in daily life that come up that are troubling for you. Like maybe somebody that makes you angry, but your anger is out of proportion to what the person actually did. So that's a sign that the false self is kind of in action rather than, I mean, it's normal for us to get angry from time to time, but if it's out of proportion, it's probably the false self. So can we catch that? Can we notice that and stop doing it? Or can it allow us to pause from that activity and just come from that place um, of interior silence or that peace within? So see, that's what resting from that activity is, perhaps catching ourselves. And there's practices that help us with that, like the welcoming prayer. So I don't know if you've learned that, but we'll talk about that a little bit this afternoon too. Okay. Thanks, Jamie. I'm seeing things showing up in the chat, but I can't really attend to all of you and look at those too, but I'll look at them when we break.
Julie, I just
Yes.
wanted to comment. You had made reference earlier to Katie's voice, to the tone and the invitation of her voice. And I feel the same about yours. It's so comforting. It's just like a gentle invitation for reflection of these thoughts and ideas. And I just so appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm. Okay. Thank you, Nancy. My hope when doing a day like this is that you feel, because we're doing so much centering prayer and Lectio, that you feel that the whole day is prayer. So, anyone else?
Hi, Julie. This is Pat.
Pat?
Not a question, really just more of an observation. I really enjoyed and appreciated the guided meditation when you invited us into resting with the words, I am. And for me personally, I found the words, I would say, kind of resting on my shoulders, kind of exterior to my body, something that was being held rather than experienced interiorly. And yet, as the prayer progressed and I spent more time, I felt a movement of the I am, really into the heart, into the spiritual heart. And that was a new experience for me, something I hadn't done before like that. But there was something that was changing. There was something that was happening in the experience. So thanks for that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you, Pat.
I was very touched by the silence that is already there. And there's something about that in my day, I may not be taking the time for a formal sit, but I am taking a time to just being present to God. And that really touched me because that's very true. And there's something very, for me, very, I don't know, just very joyful about that.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Yeah. I have to say, when I found those quotes that I used that all seem to be referring to the same thing, it really took me. You know, I was like, oh, okay. There's something to this, and other spiritual teachers are experiencing the same thing and teaching the same thing. So, any other comments, things that came up for you?
I find it comforting that all of this angst and all that other stuff is God's work within us rather than just being total losers.
Kathleen, you know God would never think of you as a total loser. But I know what you mean. Sometimes we're hard on ourselves, but it's, one of the things, if you've gone to a centering prayer introductory workshop, that we talk about thoughts as being, what is it that we say, Katie? They're normal, they're inevitable, but then we also say that they're integral. And I think that's what we really mean by integral. That it's a way of, God working on us, but also pointing things out to us. That there are a lot of things that are troublesome to us, and again, we'll talk more about that this afternoon too. That are just healed. They come into our awareness, and they're healed. And there are other things that are revealed to us from doing this practice. So, I think again that that's God's action working in us to reveal to us something that maybe needs more of our attention. So thanks, Kathleen, for bringing that up.
Julie, I appreciated you talking about simple acts, and particularly the 4 weeks of Advent, making those weeks meaningful to where, for example, I guess next week would be the week of gratitude, where we can just be actively grateful and participate in Advent that way.
Yeah, let me just ask, Bob, were you aware of those 4 themes of Advent? Bob, I can't hear you. I don't know, something happened to because I really I don't know if I wasn't aware of it or just didn't pay much attention to it. And I was teaching or helping to facilitate a class for contemplative outreach some years ago during Advent. And, it's like that's also what the 4 candles are sort of about, is those themes. And gosh, it's just so beautiful. And Yeah, a way, it's one of those ways to make the season more meaningful, I think. So, thank you.
Julie, I like the comments you said, the more we turn to God, the more we rest. That's really kind of touched me and thought, wow, I need to do that more daily during everything I do. Just kind of talk to him more.
Yeah, and sometimes just being more aware, more attention. Yeah. Thanks, Rita.
Julie, this is Terry. I can't be seen today, but I did want to thank you for everything you've said this morning. And I don't know if I've ever heard it put this way, but you said we do centering prayer and God does the contemplative prayer within. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
Yes, that I think so. Gosh, it's funny when you do a presentation, I don't always remember what I said because, I kind of try to let God speak through me. So if that's what you heard, that's probably what I said, Terry. What did,
Well, that
can you say
that
what it meant to you?
Well, what it meant to me, I have probably more than I needed to put that in my brain a lot. Like, okay, well, what's this contemplative prayer and what's this centering prayer? And isn't centering prayer contemplative prayer? What does it mean that it leads to contemplative prayer? But how I heard you say that today was just the action of sitting down and doing centering prayer is my part, and that that light within that prays always, that connects always, or as often as is possible for this mortal being, um, to be connected with God is his work or her work, as the case may be.
Yeah.
So we do centering prayer, and God does the contemplative prayer within, is what I heard, and I'm going with it.
Yeah. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. And I mean, this isn't something that I made up. Father Thomas has always talked about that contemplative prayer is a gift. And so centering prayer um, like I said, that it's like a doorway into contemplative prayer. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So, Katie, what time are we breaking?
The schedule says we are breaking at 11:05, but it's just now 11, so that's fine. Let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back 5 minutes earlier than the actual schedule, but that gives us a little more time for lunch.
Okay.
So I'll see everybody who can stay at 10 minutes after 11
Okay. For centering prayer.
for
Great.
centering prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
thank you.
Again, please mute yourselves while Julie's talking and be prepared to reflect afterwards. Thanks, Julie. And put Julie on speaker view if you wish.
I love that picture of Father Thomas. I think it really shows the shining light within him. I don't know if you all ever had the opportunity to meet him or know him. Because he lived in Colorado, I got to visit with him quite a few times over the years. So anyway, he's a much beloved. So we'll start this afternoon. And as you might imagine, I have spent a lot of time reading Father Thomas's books and viewing his videos, especially the Spiritual Journey series. And one of the themes that I've heard him talk about repeatedly is this: the ordinary events of daily life become our practice. And it seemed so important to him that we understand this wasn't about sitting on a cushion meditating, right? What we're doing is not just about sitting in prayer. And he always said that the fruits of centering prayer are experienced in daily life, not in the actual prayer period. And so, I'm still remembering Tina's question from earlier, is to remember that, Tina, that whatever you're experiencing during the prayer period is just exactly what you're meant to experience, and that the fruits come in daily life, not in that actual prayer period. So I want us to take a look at some of the ways that Father Thomas fleshed out this idea of daily life being our practice. So here's some quotes from a few different places in his work. So when we talk about the fruits of our practice being experienced in daily life, I think of all the times over the years when I would hear people judging their practice by whether they were experiencing peaceful, consoling prayer periods, which they judged as good, versus having a barrage of thoughts for the whole 20 minutes, bad. So they were not yet realizing that it doesn't matter what happens during the prayer period, because regardless, the effects are experienced in daily life. Father Thomas talked about daily life all the time. He not only encouraged a daily practice of centering prayer, but also other practices for daily living, like the welcoming prayer, Lectio Divina, the active prayer, and a few others besides that. I think that these quotes that I'm offering here provide three different aspects of how he talked about daily life. The first one has to do with fidelity to our commitments in daily life as our primary spiritual practice. So you might think about how fidelity to your commitments in daily life is a spiritual practice for you. What are the commitments that you have in your life today? Such things as your work, your family, maybe a spouse or partner, children, parents, or you may be a caregiver to a family member. What about your friends, your community, your neighborhood? And if you've made a commitment to any of these people or groups, how do you approach them? It can be a challenge to approach commitments and responsibilities with joy, kindness, and compassion rather than as an obligation, right? So think about that can be a challenge. Do you feel good about your approach to your commitments in daily life? And if not, how might you change them? How might you change your approach? So the second quote is similar. Daily life is practice number one. The contemplative dimension of the gospel perceives in daily life the treasures of holiness hidden in the most trivial and mundane events. How do you think of your daily life? Do you think of it as trivial and mundane? And has that changed for you over time as your practice has deepened? Can you think of treasures that there might be, treasures of holiness in your daily life? As I was preparing for this, I was thinking about somebody that's in one of the courses that I'm teaching right now, who's a young mother and talks about the challenges of doing centering prayer with a 4-year-old. And she actually wrote a reflection paper and was telling me about, how she gets frustrated when she's in the middle of, trying to have some quiet time and do centering prayer, and her 4-year-old comes and climbs into her lap. Well, my response to her was, think about this from the 4-year-old's perspective, that the 4-year-old is climbing in to the lap of her beloved mother, who is sitting in the lap of the divine, and how that must feel to that 4-year-old. And can we look for the holiness in something like that? So anyway, then the third quote is, daily life challenges our attitudes and actively brings to consciousness through events what is passively brought to consciousness in the purification of the unconscious during centering prayer. Now, I have found this quote to be interesting and also challenging. So we know that when we consent to God's action within, we're consenting to what we call divine therapy. That's, again, that's God's action within us, the Spirit working under our conscious level. And we may think, in our interior prayer life that we've resolved some issue, only to be confronted with an emotional outburst when we're triggered by something from the unconscious. And as we undergo this purification that Father Thomas talks about, we become more aware of our attitudes towards life and how we're reacting to people, events, and circumstances in daily life. So that's kind of the point I was trying to make with Jamie's question earlier this morning. And without these experiences in daily life, we wouldn't see so clearly what continues to block us in our relationships with others and with God. So it's up to us to decide if we're willing to consent to being transformed in and through the experiences in daily life. I don't know if any of you have seen this model before. It's something that we've been using as long as I can remember in Denver. It actually was created, somebody created it with Father Thomas to give like a summary of the false self system, or what we also sometimes just call the human condition. And I just wanted to show this. This, again, remember that this is a summary. It's not the whole teaching. If you haven't read about or watched videos about the human condition, you'll probably want to do that. But anyway, how how do we get through daily life and maintain our interior silence when our false self system bumps up against the false self system of almost everyone we encounter? So think about that, our false self bumping up against the false self of others. So my hope is that this model helps you see not only what we face in daily life, but how important it is to think of daily life as our practice. This really, as I think I've already alluded to, is where the greatest lesson in interior silence, or the lack thereof, comes from. So let me just kind of run through this real quickly. This down below that's in the black is our unconscious. And up here in the lighter area is our conscious. So we might call this our ordinary level of consciousness. And then, what I always like to say is kind of lurking underneath is the unconscious, where the energy centers reside. And if you remember in this teaching, power and control, esteem and affection, and security and survival. And the other thing that is in the unconscious, and I think sometimes maybe even more powerful than the energy centers, is our cultural conditioning. We don't realize how much we've been conditioned by the culture that we live in. Sometimes unless we experience other cultures and how they might be experiencing our culture. But anyway, this is kind of what drives the false self system, and it leads to attachments and aversions, which sometimes we also might call these addictions. They might be things that we fear. They can be things that we are tightly grasping, we feel that we have to have in our life. And the attachments and aversions really come out of desires, which is really our hidden values. You can see that these hidden values in black again relate to what's in the unconscious. When our attachments, aversions, these hidden values bump up against a triggering event in daily life, it's like what I was saying about false self meeting false self. There can be a frustration which sets off afflictive emotions, commentaries, emotional turmoil, what we call interior dialogue, internal dialogue. And then that kind of feeds back in, and it's a very tight system where everything sort of feeds off of each other. Excuse me. And I have this circled in yellow here because I wanted to kind of focus on this as we talk about daily life and some of the practices that can help us to deal with this and to stop the reactions and that sort of thing. So here's another model. This one I adapted from Intimacy with God, which is one of Father Thomas's videos. So we live most of our daily life from our ordinary level of awareness or consciousness. And as I said in that other slide, what's lurking just under the surface is the unconscious. Now, this is something that I added to Thomas Keating's model just to show that the darker circle, that it's the unconscious that often blocks us in being able to take responsibility for our emotional life, and also blocks us from deepening our relationships with others and with God. And so that's where our woundedness resides, our beliefs and defenses, the energy centers, and our perceptions. And a regular practice of centering prayer starts to penetrate this layer. And so we start to be able to access our spiritual level of awareness, which then awakens us to our true self at the level where we experience God, which we might also say is interior silence. So when I was answering Tina's question earlier this morning, it's, this is our ordinary level of consciousness. When we are finally able to drop down into the spiritual level, that's where we, I'd say, seem to have maybe an easier time letting thoughts come and letting them go, as if they're just kind of a stream passing over us without having to engage with them. So this is a little different model of how, when unchecked, our emotional programs run our lives. And this idea came to me one time when I was listening to the teaching on the welcoming prayer. And we were talking about what we can do when our buttons are pushed. And I just remember sitting back and thinking, I don't want to just have something to do when my buttons are pushed. I want to be able to disengage the buttons. And so take this in for a moment. Our woundedness, beliefs, perceptions, defenses, the energy centers, the cultural conditioning, all these things on the outside here are often in control until we realize that they're in control and we take measures to dismantle them. And you can see the interaction between the triggering event in daily life and really whether it sets off afflictive emotions or commentaries doesn't really matter, because it all comes into play if we're triggered or if our buttons are pushed. I think a lot of times we don't realize this, but I'm sure many of you know this, that most feelings, even if they're uncomfortable, if they're appropriate to the event or circumstances, they'll dissipate with time. And they don't start this cascade of emotions and commentaries that seems to take over. So when you have this cascade, that's when you can tell something from the unconscious has been triggered. So how do we take measures to dismantle them? And for those of you that are working with my book or have read my book, you probably will be able to guess that I suggest with contemplative practices. So we're going to talk about a few of them. And again, this is just briefly, these are things that are taught by contemplative outreach, and maybe even, I'm sure in your chapter, you may have access to them, or you can access them on the Contemplative Outreach website for more information. So I just want to touch on them and just try to show how they can help us. So I want to start by pointing out what we call the movements in the practice of the welcoming prayer. So the first movement in the welcoming prayer is to feel and sink into what you are experiencing this moment in your body. The feelings, emotions, thoughts, body sensations, or commentaries. And so this is often going to be painful emotions, or what we call afflictive emotions, or could be when we feel restless or agitated, when a commentary starts and repeats over and over, stirring up emotions. So we feel whatever it is and sink into it. Allow it to be there. Allow it to be whatever it is. And then the second movement is welcome what you're experiencing this moment in your body as an opportunity to consent to the divine indwelling. Welcome the divine indwelling into the feelings, emotions, thoughts, body sensations, or commentaries in your body by silently saying the word welcome. So notice that what we are welcoming is not the suffering itself, but the God of love who is always present to us, but we're often not aware of the presence. The suffering is an opportunity to embrace God and receive grace. And then the third movement is letting go. Let go by saying the following sentence: I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. So there was a time when Father Thomas said that he felt the welcoming prayer was the second most important practice after centering prayer. Why is that? I think it's because it gives us a way in daily life to work with what may be starting to surface in our centering prayer. And the development of this practice is the fruit of Father Thomas's teaching on dismantling the emotional programs, which is part of the human condition course in the spiritual journey series. It's also, he also talks about it in his book Invitation to Love. But anyway, it was the combination of his teaching and his work with Mary Mrzowski, who's the one who gave life to the welcoming prayer. So when we can start to quiet down some of that interior dialogue, that's usually comprised of afflictive emotions and commentaries, we start to move more into experiencing interior silence in the midst of activity in daily life. So Lectio Divina is another practice that can reach into our daily life from a regular practice. And we use the same method for spiritual reading as we do for Lectio Divina. Spiritual reading is usually with some sort of spiritual book that's not scripture, which is really pretty much the only difference. So if you take just as we've done today, a short passage from scripture, some spiritual book, and spend some time with it, reading it, reflecting or pondering not only what it says, but what it might mean to you in your life today. And then notice how your heart responds to the reading, and then simply rest in God with whatever that you have received. It really is as simple as that. In fact, Father Thomas has called Lectio Divina a methodless method. So if you sat with the intention of being with God with a short passage, you would naturally go through something like what we've just described and what we practice today. Now, the four senses of Scripture aren't really talked about that much around Lectio Divina, but they're what's awakened in us when we practice Lectio Divina or spiritual reading, bringing us to deeper levels of meaning. So the literal being the text, the characters, the circumstances. The allegorical speaks to us in the voice of story, metaphor, and symbol. The moral level is how we are called to live, following the example of Jesus. And unitive is a being to being encounter with the divine. And I've found that because I've practiced Lectio and spiritual reading for so long, that I often find myself using a version of this method to help with something that's going on in my life. And some of you may remember Sister Maria Tasto, who taught us years ago to do what she called a Lectio on life. So it would be like reading or listening or even describing what happened in my life or what I'm experiencing, and then reflecting on what happened and my response, what it might be saying to me in my life today about the experience or about the person or about myself. Responding from my heart rather than reacting, being mindful of my intention to come from a place of love in my interactions, and then resting, being with the divine. And so you might try this with scripture or spiritual books and then see if the practice generalizes into your daily life. It really happened to me without me really even being aware of it. And then at some point, I started realizing that, kind of what I just described in daily life was something that I just was doing automatically without realizing a connection with this practice. So, and then you might remember in Thessalonians, Paul suggests that we pray without ceasing, which is what I have often thought of as contemplative life. So here's another practice for daily life that can help you to turn your attention to God. So, after you've practiced Lectio or spiritual reading, you may notice a word or phrase that resonated with you, as so many of you did in these 2 sessions that we had today. You can carry that word or phrase into your daily life to continue the prayer by creating an active prayer phrase that you repeat over and over again. Think about how our regular practice of centering prayer raises our awareness of God in our daily life until something happens that triggers our emotional programs. And the active prayer can help to give our minds something else to do besides that endless interior dialogue. I think, I just want to point out that we have to be careful not to try to use it to suppress emotions. So there will be times when the emotions and commentaries are already triggered, and the welcoming prayer would be a more suitable practice. The active prayer can help to keep us more in a place in daily life where we don't get triggered. And it has the added benefit of keeping our attention on God. Now, you might know that there's a long history in the Christian tradition using the Jesus prayer, like an active prayer. And, this is a version of the Jesus prayer: Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. There's other versions of it, shorter, some longer. And there may be other short prayers that resonate with you, and I've included here a list of some, and you certainly can always feel free to make up your own. You try to keep it short so that it doesn't engage your intellectual faculties. In other words, to help you move from your mind into your heart. We use the active prayer repeatedly when our minds are not occupied in conversation, in work, or some activity that requires our concentration. So it's become such a habit for me to use the active prayer, and throughout many, many years, I have used it when I'm outside walking. And so I don't really have to remember to do it anymore. It just naturally comes to me. And Father Thomas suggests that staying with the same active prayer for a period of time, it helps to work its way into our heart. And sometimes we may even experience that it's starting to erase the old tapes, so to speak, or at least quiet them down. So now, here's back to this model. You can see how contemplative practices can start to put some space in between these cogs so that one doesn't set off another and start that cascade. This is what can happen when we put intention into contemplative practices for daily life. So, as we were talking about simple acts, if we do some of these simple acts with intention and discipline, they won't fade from consciousness, and you can see if they can help you to stay in the present moment and bring that quietness and stillness into daily life. And as I said earlier, if anybody hasn't encountered these practices, they're the ones that I've mentioned here are all taught by contemplative outreach. So I want to bring us back to the themes of Advent for a few minutes, because I'm hoping to raise our awareness of some of these simple acts. So the contemplative practices that contemplative outreach teaches aren't the only practices that we can engage in to help us get to and stay in that state of interior silence that we talked about. So do you remember the few simple acts that we talked about around the Advent themes? I know that was hours ago now. We embrace hope with active anticipation. We find inner peace with yearning, reconciliation, and pursuing harmony. We celebrate joy with gratitude, and we cultivate love by embodying God's love. So we can make a practice during this season of Advent of integrating these values into our daily lives. And just like all of the other practices we learn to integrate into daily life, we are sustaining our attention to God's loving presence. And this is what I think it means to live a contemplative life. So now one more look at this model. You can see that it's a little different now. This is what happens to us over time. So the quote on this slide this is from Open Mind, Open Heart, is God and our true selves are not separate. Though we are not God, God and our true self are the same thing. Now, I don't really understand what this means. Just to be honest with you, I think of it though as a koan, which is something that comes out of the Zen tradition, which helps us to see how inadequate or limiting our logical faculty is, and it's meant to challenge our usual way of thinking. And I think this also sort of relates to that Thomas Merton quote from earlier. So you can maybe put those two things together and see also with this model if you can make any sense out of it for yourself. So, but anyway, what I wanted to show you here is after some time of practice, whether, of course, with our centering prayer, but also with the welcoming prayer, with embracing hope, with Lectio Divina, with cultivating love, we're starting to experience interior silence. So our centering prayer practice over time softens up our defenses and boundaries so that they're permeable. And this allows us to more readily access the divine indwelling. So the obstacles that kept us from experiencing God and our true self are starting to come into awareness as the unconscious becomes conscious. And, you know, all the other levels of awareness continue to be part of our consciousness, only now with the work that we and God have done in tandem in prayer, we're starting to experience the transforming union. And I told you early this morning that we were going to talk just a little bit about that. Father Thomas says that transforming union is a restructuring of consciousness, that it's not an experience or set of experiences. Something in us is being changed. So now our ordinary daily life, subjected to divine therapy, and I say subjected, but it's also only through our consent, through centering prayer and again our consent to God's action within, it brings us to this. The experience of the transforming union is a way of being in the world that enables us to live daily life with the invincible conviction of continuous union with God. And there's something about this phrase that it just holds so much meaning for me that it actually has almost become an active prayer for me, an active prayer in the way of a request for a gift from God. Do I have the invincible conviction of continuous union with God? I think sometimes I do. I don't think I do all the time, but it is something that I feel strongly that I have the ability to experience. And anyway, so I just wanted to say from my own experience how much that phrase resonates with me. And then, the presence of God is evident without our trying to find God in whatever we're experiencing in life. So we're not only seeking God as much as experiencing God. So, and then he says, this state of consciousness is not passing, but a permanent awareness that spontaneously envelops the whole of life. And because of this restructuring of consciousness, divine love can now manifest itself in all our activities, even the most ordinary. And see how brilliant it was for Katie to pick out some of those readings that we did Lectio with, which have fit so nicely with a lot of what I've talked about today. So this develops over time through our practices. God gives us opportunities over and over again to grow in trust and faith until we discover that we're freer from the obstacles of the false self and that we are, in fact, transmitting divine love in our daily lives. And keep in mind, this is without trying to do anything, that we are being changed. I remember thinking for years that I don't really understand what transforming union means, and that it probably was because I had never experienced it. But it's really not some mysterious esoteric experience. It's me being transformed by God through the practice of centering prayer into a new way of being in the world. I no longer have to try to be anything. I just am. And that's a tremendous freedom. So I hope that is something that helps you to see, to kind of put together the many different things that we talked about today. I'm going to to end the presentation with another guided meditation. And I think we have plenty of time. Yeah, I think we have plenty of time. One of the reasons, this is another guided meditation that I adapted from Adyashanti. And one of the reasons that I like this one and decided I've tried to use it a few different times. Think about the fourth guideline of centering prayer, where, it basically tells us to remain in silence for a few minutes. And how many times do I not pay attention to that? So when the timer goes off, I jump up out of the chair. And I'm sure at least one or two of you have done that too. So this guided meditation I offer to you as something that can help us to spend that couple of minutes in silence so that we can then bring what we experienced in prayer into our daily life. Okay. I think it touches on that silence within that we can then move into daily life. So I'm going to start with a few minutes of silence. And then at the end of silence, I'll start the guided meditation, which this one is called the ground of your being. And so I'm going to start I'm going to ring the gong 3 times and then say a prayer. And we'll go into just about 2 or 3 minutes of silence. Be still and know that I am God. just let yourself be still. And let the quietness within you see through your eyes. So have your eyes open. This is an eyes open meditation. Just continue to be still. Notice the stillness that's already there. Notice the quietness that's already there and feel it. Sense it. Notice it throughout all of you. Feel it throughout all of you. So you're letting that stillness and that quietness see through your eyes. Look out through your eyes from that stillness, that quiet, from that presence. And let it hear through your ears. And let it feel through your senses. And no matter what you have or have not realized, you're going to just let go all at once. Like letting go of a stone out of your hand. Just let go all at once of the meditator, a sense of the doer, the spiritual seeker, the controller. You might even use your hand and arm to make a gesture of letting go. Let it all go. Just like opening your hand as easily as if you were dropping a stone from your hand, just all at once. And then just rest in that, in the present moment. Just allowing yourself to be present beyond all ideas, all conceptualizations. Let yourself rest in the now and already present condition of silence. Even if you have thoughts arising, they're rising within the quietness of the eternal now. So by leaving them alone, just leaving them alone, notice that every thought, every feeling arises within this vast, quiet space of presence that is the eternal now. So just to whatever extent you experience it, it may be very subtle or may be really obvious, but don't force anything. Remember, not grasping at anything, just taking it how it comes. Letting these instructions evoke in you whatever they evoke. And just let yourself know yourself as this condition of ungraspable freedom, of peace. It's already there. Just rest in the knowing of that, in the sense of it. Feel it throughout all of you, throughout your body, throughout your mind, throughout the subtlety of the senses, in the space around you, the vastness of your being and your connection to all being, to the ground of being. So for another moment or two, just rest in the now and already present silence and stillness. And even if you touch upon it for just a second, that's fine. and then it comes back for maybe a second. Or maybe it's just there with you all the time. Whatever it is. Don't grasp or try to maintain. Just rest in that eternal now moment in the ground of your being. Amen. So, hi. I'm always happy to come back and see all your faces again. So I think we have enough time now to open the floor for questions, if there's any questions. But I hope to also hear just some comments about how what we did today struck you, and what you're going to take with you, as a result of the experiences of the day. And we can do as we've done and have you unmute and just speak when you're ready.
I would just,
Julie, I want to thank you. This is Jamie from Columbus. And I'm sorry, did somebody else start first?
Go ahead, Jamie.
I just want to thank you because you put all these pieces together for me. I've been practicing centering prayer for a while, and I've tried a little bit of welcoming, a little bit of some of the other things you mentioned, but you really made it clear how they all fit together and they can help each other. And I'm going to take that away today to be much more attentive to the whole package and not just to my practice. So I really thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jamie.
I was just going to say that I really appreciate the artwork that you had in your slides. Very beautiful. Thanks for sharing them.
Sure. Thank you, Marianne. That's one of the things that is the most fun for me about creating presentations.
I came away with a couple little snippets that I'll share.
Okay.
One is I really liked your phrase of our practice being a quote softening up of our defenses and an opening to silence. And then the other one was when you ask us what rest meant to us, I thought immediately, well, rest was a vacation from my job. But then I thought a little deeper and I thought, well, my job, my false self thinks my job is to be thinking, remembering, pondering, solving. And so when I want to take a rest from that and centering prayer, I rest from all of that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Tom.
This is Terry. I loved the way you took the themes of Advent and encouraged us to use those as practices we can activate. There's so much richness in our tradition, and it's it's been easy for me to discard that, but it's good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Hi, I'm Sue. I have gone through your book, and today was a beautiful follow-up. But what I took away is your serenity that you had yourself, your humbleness, what you exude in yourself, really had a big impact on me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
I'm grateful for your explanation of the transforming union. I always thought that was one level I'd never get to. I just thought it was impossible. But the way you put it, it's just a new way of being in the world. I love that. And that you don't have to work at it, do things, you just being your true self. And I love that. It opened up a little door in my heart.
Oh, good. Thanks, Rita. I know we spend so much of our lives trying, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I always appreciated about centering prayer, that it's not about trying, it's about letting go. Yeah, thank you.
I had an experience once on a 9-day intensive at Mercy Center, Auburn, watching a Thomas Keating video early in the retreat, and I had little tears running down my cheeks because Father Thomas was talking about evacuation of the obstacles. And I had this acknowledgement, yes, that happened, and I didn't try, I didn't do it. It was all God. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I spent most of my life trying.
Mm.
So glad to get rid of that.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah.
A couple things I made notes of that touched me today. I loved when you talked about contemplative prayer, something God does, and also Christ in you leading your life. Those are two important for me today.
Thanks, Nancy.
I was wondering if you would comment on your use of the word hope in the context of versus optimism in terms of how that applies or how those may differ. I know Father Thomas makes a statement about theological hope, and I was wondering if you could wax on a little bit about how you see that, especially in terms of cultural conditioning, as it appears to me in this time of massive change in the world, that word may be difficult.
The word hope may be difficult. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm trying. I'm trying to remember something, and it's not coming to me. I'm sorry, Jerry. Hoping. I can't remember if it's a quote or if it's a scripture passage.
That's fine.
If I think about it some other time, maybe I'll have somebody in your group get back to you. But I think it's, when I think when you have experiences over time with doing a practice and living a contemplative life, um, and also it's not, as you said, the world. I mean, there's so many people suffering in this world. I'll tell you what it reminds me of. Maybe this will be helpful. Because, I always admired Mother Teresa. I don't know if everybody feels that way, but I always admired her for what she was able to do. But there was always something about it that scared me because it was always like, God, I hope God doesn't ask me to do something like that because I don't think I have it in me.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing Joan Chittister one time talking about how overwhelmed people get when they see all the suffering of the world, and they just think there's not anything that me as this lonely little human being can do to help anything, right? And she said, we can't all be like Mother Teresa, but we can do something. And so that was her kind of her admonition to us, is do something. And can I get some hope out of doing something? Think about, I mean, this is an example that I use all the time because I think about in my earlier days when I was working full time and felt more harassed by life, that I would go to the grocery store and completely ignore the grocery store clerk. And I don't do that anymore. I talk to them. And usually they're pretty nice people and they have something to say and they appreciate somebody looking them in the eye and saying hello. And, maybe that's all I can do, but that's something. And so, maybe, I don't know. I don't know if that helped, Jerry, but um, yeah. I like to, that's what I liked about the way that these values were put in that Advent, in those Advent themes, that it's not just sitting by passively with hope. And I don't think optimism is the same thing. I'm not very optimistic right now, but I do have a lot of hope. And some of that is because I trust God. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Anybody else?
Well, this is Chris on, hope. And I think I do agree with Father Keatings. And I had actually, before that happened, I had this experience where I had to have a surgery done on my eye, which sounded pretty intense. And I remember I must have gotten a puzzled look on my face. And the doctor he looked at me kind of irritated and said, you look like you're skeptical. And I just had this in an instant. I looked him straight in the eye and I thought, my hope is not in you and your skill. I didn't say this, but in my mind, I thought it. My hope is in God. And so, therefore, yes, I will agree to allow you to do that to my eye. And and that really changed it, and just in that instance, because I even tell other people, don't put your hope in me because I'll always let you down. I'm human. Put your hope in God. And I guess no matter what's going on in the world around me, if we get blown off the face of the planet, God is still present in everything. So I don't know. That's how I think about hope now at this point in my life. But I have been totally enjoyed this day. And thank you so much, Julie, and
Mhm.
everybody else, Katie, and everybody who made this possible. Thank you.
And thank you, Chris. Yeah. So, Katie and Bob, did you want to do something else with these last 10 minutes, or do you want to keep going?
You're really on target because this portion of the program says, "What touched you today?" And people have been saying that. That's what they've been commenting on. What touched you? What will you take away? What is important for you today? So if anyone else wants to add to that conversation, we will do so. And then we'll also look at some announcements and concluding prayer. So, anybody else want to add what touched you today with any part of this program?
Katie, I was just going to ask if there's a particular website we could use to make a love offering or a donation for today.
Yes. Yes, there is, and we will post that at the end here. It is either by PayPal or by check to an address to Tom Davis, who is our treasurer. That would be lovely because we do provide a stipend to our speakers. We have to keep our technology going and even buy a new laptop apparently because the one we were using didn't allow Bob to talk a little earlier. So basic things like that keep an organization like us going. And we also have a fund to provide some stipends to people to attend the silent retreat that we now sponsor in September. So thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
Question. Yep. We'll put it up there.
Julie, I just want to thank you for today. I'm still I took a lot of notes, which is how I process, and I still need to continue to process, but I was really blown away by Transforming Union. That was an amazing thing that I finally understood for the first time. And even how to look at centering prayer. I've been away from it for a while. And when you said, it was so freeing to hear, it's not about what happens in the centering prayer period. That was really a powerful message. And thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Carolyn. Yeah, I think sometimes if we think that that's where it all has to happen, that can be very discouraging. So it's, and I can remember Father Thomas said the only thing you can do wrong in centering prayer is to get up out of the chair. Yep. Thank you, Carolyn.
I hope everybody gets Julie's book, but I especially hope Julie puts it on audio.
Ooh.
There you go. That would be awesome with Julie's voice too, because she does have a very calming voice. But you never thought that.
I don't know how you do that. I self-published through Balboa Press, and they didn't offer an audiobook. So I suppose you can always pay for it. Yeah. Well, think about that. Thanks, Kathleen.
Everything you said today is so consistent with what we learned from Father Vinny. You can't do it wrong. He kept saying, you can't do it wrong. Just show up. Your mind wanders 1,000 times. 1,000 times you reset your intention. And that gives God permission. And that prayer we say at the end, all praise to God from whom who is at work in us, doing more than we could ask for or imagine. That really happens. It really happens. So.
Well, I'm going to just say the thing I'm taking away from this, because, I listen to myself talk all the time. I really appreciated the prayer. I think a lot of times when, different things that I've done where there's a speaker that that organizations don't include as much prayer as you included, which is why are we, it just like this is why we're here, right? Let's pray together. This is an opportunity. So I really enjoyed that. And I also enjoyed, because a lot of times things that I do, I'm the one leading Lexio. So I appreciated being able to just listen. So anyway, thank you for how you put this day together and for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Bob, would you put up the announcements so we don't run out of time for that? And then we'll do a concluding prayer. So I hope you can read this. We learned, we set up our own contemplative outreach of Columbus with the help of contemplative outreach of Colorado a number of years ago, and train additional trainers to do our own 9-day intensive Centering Prayer retreat in Fremont, Ohio at Our Lady of the Pines. And that place does have beautiful, beautiful trees. I was really taken with the trees and the silence and the ability to just be in nature. It was wonderful last September, and we're going to do it again next September, 17th to the 24th. And then we'll do another Silent Saturday with Father Bill Sheehan, Finding a Place of the Heart, on a Lenten program, March 15th, 8:30 to 2:30 p.m. again. And then the non-deductible donations to Contemplative Outreach of Columbus sent to Tom Davis at 844 Franklin Avenue, Columbus, 43205. Father Bill was part of that original group in 1983 that met at Lava Institute. So with Mary Moravsky and others who just saw the need to package what Thomas Keating was teaching, not just the monks, but everybody, and what Father Vinny was teaching at the time. So much gratitude to the shoulders of those we stand on, that God has used to spread the kingdom, as Father Vinny always said. Well, I would like to close with a version of what Father Vinny McKiernan shared with us. His version of the Our Father. Our Father, our Mother, our Lover, our Beloved, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Holy is your presence, your divine presence in each of us and in all of creation. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our daily breath, the breath of the Spirit, without whom we cannot live. Give us this day your kingdom, your kindness, your community, the beloved community that we hope for and we rarely see. Although today we got a glimpse of that beloved community right here on Zoom. Who would have believed it 5 years ago? The kingdom come. Your will be done. Your will, not mine. your will. I set aside my will in honor of your will. On earth as it is in heaven. Keep us away from the obstacles that block the flow of your love, and keep us refreshed every day in your love, your precious, gentle, strong. Then he would close, God strong and gentle. All praise to God, from whom all blessings flow. Praise us, your creatures, here below. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all for being here. You have enriched all of our lives by your presence.
Thank you. Thank you.